Hello. Today I'd like to look at some games by the Grandmaster Miezis in a pretty interesting position with the isolated pawn. And this is not a very standard type of position with the isolated pawn. It's a slightly different one, and I'll explain in a bit of a detail pretty soon. So there's different move orders that we can get this position, but the starting point that I'd like to highlight is basically here. So at some point black is going to capture on c4, or white's going to capture on d5, and white's going to have an isolated pawn on d4. Typically in these positions white tries to put the knight on f3, develop and so on. Here, however, this would be a bit inconvenient, because then if knight f3, then black would play rook e8 and inconvenience white a little bit. So Grandmaster Miezis has come up with this setup where he first puts the bishop on d3, and then he puts the knight from g1 to e2, and this way he has this flexible structure and this flexible setup of pieces that allows him to meet the assault of the black pieces, while at the same time sitting on the extra pressure that white has. And we'll see how things develop depending on what black does. So here black has the first sort of option. In the main game that I'm going to show against Akison, black played knight bd7. He could also play something like he could also play something like knight to c6, and then the game could continue like this: castle, f3, and white uses the outpost in the center, and while maintaining all the 4 pieces on the board, the extra space is proving quite useful. And this particular game went like this. And here white has 2 bishops and a strong center, and he basically had the advantage from here on, and he won in this game. And this position is in the end game, but still white has a strong advantage. Going back to the main position, in most games black plays knight b to d7, and then white typically castles. So he castled, then black played knight b6, and after bishop b3, here's another juncture. In one other game, black played knight b to d5, and after bishop to g5, white started to build up some pressure on the king side. And here, in particular, the knight on g3 is covering the f5 square, and white is threatening to play bishop to c2, and then to give checkmate on h7. And surprisingly, it's not very easy to defend against this, and in this game black was unable to do this. This is the game against the Iranian young female player, Sara Dutt, and I can't pronounce her last name. But she just had a good tournament in the Grand Prix in February, I believe, and she's about 2400 right now. And white won in a great style against her. So once white has brought all the pieces to the king side, it turns out that black has no defense. After g6, the knight does not retreat; instead, it goes to attack. And when black tries to create counterplay against the d4 pawn, then the tactics work out in white's advantage. So white sacrifices the queen, and this position turns out to be completely winning for white, because the black king is too exposed and the black pieces are too undeveloped to be able to put up resistance after bishop f5. Now the discover check is being threatened, and there's just no good defense. In particular, here black has to give up a rook, and he resigned. So going back to the main game, in this particular position white played bishop b3, and in the previous game black played knight b2 d5. Instead Akison played pawn to c6, which tries to control the d5 square, but white just continues with the same approach of putting the bishop on g5, and after h6 he'll still have the same ideas of building up the pressure on the light squares. The bishop still has to return. White increases the control of the e-file, and in some cases like this, exchanges are actually to his advantage, because here white is able to control the d5 square well, and black is unable to put a piece there, because next white can play queen to f3, rook to e5, and d5 is not under black's control. He tries to finish development of the queen side, but white starts to jump on the king side and bring the pieces to that part of the board. So already something is up in the air. Rook e7 in particular right now is threatened, and then to pick up the bishop on f5. So the bishop has to retreat, but that's a fairly passive square. Now white has a strong pressure against f7. First he finishes development though. After knight to f5, the pressure on d4 of course is not strong, not good enough, and here white opens up the game to his advantage. Taking on d5 is very dangerous, because then all of black's pieces will be hanging. He'll probably lose a knight on f5 or something to that effect, so he tries to hold on, but white just keeps increasing the pressure. Now there are some ideas with knight to h5 up in the air, some other threats possibly. Rook e8 seems natural, trying to cover up the squares on the e-file. Now the knight comes to h5, a very strong threat of knight to f6 is created. Black tries to defend it, but the bishop on f6 doesn't really do a good job at blocking the g-file, in particular because now white opens up the a2 to g8 diagonal. After the exchange, he first gives a check, and as I said, the point is that if black takes like he did, then white goes pawn to g6 to d6, and this attacks the queen, while the threat of queen to g6 is just deadly. So temporarily white has given up the piece, but he'll regain it with great returns, because the whole black king side is demolished and white still has a very strong bishop. This is a good trick, because now taking the queen is not good because of the back rank checkmate on e1, but white just calmly first defends against that threat. Now the queen on d6 is hanging, the bishop on g6 is hanging, and black has no good defense, so he had to retreat. Then white took the piece back, and he doesn't even have to waste any time on picking up the pawns. They will fall off anyway, so rook to d3 is probably threatening to bring the rook to f6 and recapture on f6 with the rook. Of course here the capture is with the extra threats. Queen h8 is a very unpleasant threat, and there's no good defense. The knight is completely tied up, it's pinned, it's going to get lost. White has no weaknesses, black has too many, and he resigned. So this set of games illustrates nicely that white in this position either has a good positional advantage, or he has a lot of ideas of creating extra play on the king side, and just following the games of one player, we can learn a lot about not just the opening positions but the middle game ones as well, and in particular through learning the sacrificial ideas and the attacking ideas, we can learn about what piece setups make sense, and that explains in particular why in this position the bishop goes to b3, so that the pressure on f7 remains very strong.